mode. Later, there will be an opportunity to ask questions during a question and answer session. You may register to ask a phone question at any time by pressing the star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be advised today's program may be recorded. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Chief Experience Officer for Zillion, Ms. Cheryl Morrison-Deutsch. You may begin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, How Employers Are Using Condition Management Programs to Reduce Health Care Costs. As we said, I'm Cheryl Morrison-Deutsch, the Chief Experience Officer at Zillion, and I'm responsible for the Restore program, which is one of the programs we're going to talk a little bit about today. I'm also joined by Joe Marullo. Joe, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, all. Joseph Marullo, work with the Operations and Analytics Department, and excited to be with you all today.
Terrific. So let's start by just talking a little bit about the agenda, letting you know what we're going to go through today. We're going to just talk briefly about who Zillion is and give an introduction to the industry challenge that we have seen out in the marketplace today. We're going to talk a little bit about the solution and what that solution is made up of around segmentation, nudges, engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about the outcomes that we believe we can get and show you how we get those, and then take some questions. So hopefully that works for everybody and everybody is in the right place. Just a real quick view on who is Zillion. Zillion is a leading behavior architecture company. We blend technology, people, and content to deliver impactful programs and solutions that target some of the most pervasive chronic health conditions affecting the U.S. today. We launched back in 2015 commercially, and currently we have multiple programs that are on the platform and hosting over 750,000 lives. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the Restore program today as we look at real-life examples of what our technology platform can do. And the Restore program targets metabolic syndrome, which encompasses many different issues or conditions, including prediabetes, diabetes, and obesity. The Restore program is a year-long digital program that combines content, technology, and coaching to deliver solutions to those members.
Great. Well, just real quick, why are we here today? So what's the point of what we're going to discuss? And one of the things we wanted to make sure that we talked about is we know the folks out there have tried a lot of different kinds of programs to get your employees healthier and therefore reduce your claims expense. And maybe it didn't work, and maybe you know why, maybe you don't know why. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is what we think is happening. As Cheryl alluded to, we've seen over multiple programs and 750,000 users. We have an assessment as to what we think is happening and what we do a little bit differently to bridge that gap. So at the top of the house, what I want you to remember is we believe the key is what we call personalized nudges, and you've got to be able to do that at scale. So what I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through this presentation is kind of a phrase that we use in-house, and that is that nudges drive engagement, engagement drives outcomes, and outcomes drives ROI. So what we're going to do is, as Cheryl alluded to, we're going to talk through one of our programs, Restore, and we're going to try to help you see why we see this potential issue and a solution for you. But in the interim, let's talk a little bit about that structural problem that Cheryl alluded to. Right now, the first type of solution a lot of folks see in the market tends to be lower cost options priced in a per employee per month manner. These solutions, they tend to be heavily application-based with structured content, structured pacing. When I say that, I think the flow of the curriculum, how it comes out, what content comes next, really only in-app communication. There's a lot of folks claiming to be coaching, and I use air quotes around that, because there tends to be a live or real person, sometimes up front, sometimes quarterly, but it often quickly descends into either a group-style coaching or robo-coaching, and really that has to do with just the general cost associated with that, and everything tends to be standardized. It's not about the user, it's about the standardized curriculum. Folks have to do 30 minutes of exercise because that's what the national organizations recommend. They have to count their calories or weigh their food. They have to read these long, drawn-out lessons and then figure out what to do on their own. It's quite frustrating. But the issue is with these kinds of solutions, they really violate several principles of behavior modification. You need real support and accountability. A group coach or robo messages aren't going to do it for the majority of people. We're going to talk about that later today. Additionally, people need these programs to fit into their daily lives, but they tend to be so structured because of some of these reimbursement requirements that there's zero room for flexibility and zero room to help the members with their specific need. As a result, and I'm sure you all have seen this, people tend to disengage at an incredibly high rate, and it's something, again, we're going to talk about later that we have some insight into. But it's also important to realize that the reason for the preponderance of this is because it's really easy to execute, really easy to scale, and really easy to try to say we're doing something to try to curb this potential and growing issue. Now, the second type of solution that exists in the market tends to be, think of it this more of like your lifestyle coaching, right? Really, really personalized, where everything from the content to the pacing to the communication is what you can almost call hyper-personalized to that particular user's needs. As a result, these types of programs do not violate the requirements to modify behavior because everything from the, as I said, the program, the content, the curriculum is getting adjusted. It's wrapping around the user instead of forcing the user to wrap around the program. But there's a cost to that. It's nearly impossible to do this at scale because the issue is it's too cost prohibitive. So the question we're asking, you can see at the top of the slide, is there a way to find balance?
Right, and so having worked with as many members as we have with all of the different programs, that was a question we actually had. How do you find balance? How do you find the right type of program for the right person? How do you get in the middle? And that's the solution that we believe we've come up with our Zillion Cube. It's our precision analytics. It's used and created based on our experience and our technology. It allows us to use precision analytics for scale and for personalization. When we think of it, we talk a lot about the mass customization of one. And what do we mean by that? Is we want to have a program that allows us to have the member feel like the program is customized to them, but allows us to scale and do that for many, many people. So we use our, so we maintain real coaching relationships and a personalized experience while still allowing a sufficient amount of the population to engage. It's a critical trade-off that you don't want to lean too far in either direction of that hyper-personalization or with kind of the general standardized wellness approach. This is something in the middle. We use these analytics to provide and support scalable coaching. In our programs, we never aim to totally replace the human interaction. We want to create an experience for the member where the right members receive the right touch at the right time. And by using our Cube, we are able to use several different models to put that together and understand how to know what that right touch is at the right time. So if we want to take a closer look at what that Zillion Cube does and how it works for those different types of members, Joe, can you walk us through a little bit about the precision analytics?
Of course. So this first slide, really think of this as the concept slide or what we were trying to create. And you'll notice 3 axes. So let's just walk through them real quick so you get an idea of what are you guys talking about. First and foremost, look at the risk assessment graph, the risk assessment axis. What we're thinking about here are things like initial assessments. Do you have biomarkers? Do we have demographics? Do we have HRA information? What do we have about that particular user that would allow us to understand their general risk profile? Additionally, as we're delivering our programs, there's also a host of understanding you have to incorporate in this particular access related to how the user is engaging, if you're using passive collection of related information via devices, or even follow-up biomarkers. Let's say someone's doing 12-month annual screenings, we can get that back into the calculation as well. But there's more to it than that, right? There's estimates out there that suggest only about 10% of your health state comes from this type of data, 20% coming from your genes, and 60 to 70% coming from social determinants. So we have to bring in other components. So if you look at the other axis, others like you and personal preference, we tend to call that the type of consumer axis. This has to do with everything from standard marketing segmentation, readiness or preparedness to change, looking at surveys to understand folks' preferences. And the combination of this particular axis mixed with the risk assessment allows you to start to identify different types of users who need to engage in different ways. but there is one more axis, and that's time. If you think about folks going through a program like this, they're going through their own evolution and their own journey, and as a result, you have to try to pick them up where they are on that journey. And so the combination of these three together results in the joke that Cheryl and I use. We call them cubelets. They look like little balloons on here, but the goal is to try to get this so narrowed down through all the inbound data, our understanding about that user, and the type of interaction they might need along their individual journey. That gets you smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of the clusters of how and what type of program we want to deliver. Now, I know that sounds a little abstract. We're going to continue to flesh that out through the deck, but this is the concept. And so let's go to the next slide. We can talk a little bit more about some of the details that are happening. And what I want you to see here is this is kind of how it starts. Our members interact with us across a host of meaningful measures. They interact, again, keep in mind this is our Restore program, so these are ways that we identify users in terms of their biomarkers or their weight, but also how they're interacting with us in terms of their meal logs, their devices that they're wearing, the classes they're attending, etc. This is the input we're getting from the system. What happens then is this input then comes into this is the cube in action. This is where that information and the understanding of the history of what works on this kind of program now mixes with the host of dynamic models that I was just alluding to. And it's everything from, I'm sure if I say, what is the probability of someone succeeding if they do X number of things? That kind of makes sense, right? But you have to do more than that. You have to look at the individual. You have to look at their psychographic segments. You have to look at the type of consumer. You have to include all of those pieces because it is an enormous amount of what the overarching health state and end game is going to look like. From there, we then start the next probabilistic nudge. Now, those systematic nudges can come across a host of ways. Is it a coach? Is it something for the user to do? Is it something in a social setting that they should interact with peers? We're trying to figure out what works well for this particular user, and that's why you see the feedback loop going up to the individual at the top. So this is a little more detailed. This is generally how the flow works and what we're trying to do. And again, I know this is potentially a little abstract, so here's what we're going to do. First things first, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the models that we're talking about in the bottom. And I've been harping a lot on understanding the type of user, and oftentimes this is more important than, frankly, what they're doing. It's more important for us to understand them. So Cheryl's going to walk us through a little bit on some examples with respect to some segmentation.
Right, because I think that sounds great in theory. It's a good picture. But what does it really mean? So what actually changes or what's different for the different members that help drive that engagement? And what you've got here are it's called segmentation, but it's 5 examples of segmentation, 5 different individuals that we can identify or individual segments that we can identify based on that information that Joe showed on the previous slide. So if we think about it, what difference does it make? If you look at the first person there, they are looking at and highlighting consequences, and they provide current impact, right? They're not necessarily looking at and thinking about long-term choices. They're thinking about what's going on right now. And so convincing them is worth it. You have to convince them that it's worth their time. You have to think about how they and what they want to do. Basically, as it says below, you need to answer the why for them, and you need to make sure that they understand what they're doing. Unless they understand what they're doing, they're not going to be interested in moving forward. And so you look at that, and we think about what tools to use, and we evaluate that during enrollment. But we know somebody like this is a high-frequency touch. This is someone that we will touch many different ways, both through the cube, both through the application and through coaching. And we will also look at what their social needs are. Is this someone whose social needs would work for or not? Then you move on to number 2, and if you take a look, this is really about a trade-off. They've got a ton of competing priorities. They have family, they have job, they may have volunteering. They need to connect healthy choices with their priorities. They have to understand about how to put themselves first. So one of the things we'll do is a lot of coaching, but also understanding their lifestyle and their challenges to help them set small goals. We'll use communication tools with them that will speak towards why putting themselves first is really putting their family first or putting their job first. It's because if they're not healthy, they can't do what they need to do. It's changing the lens in which they look at the prioritization of their own health. Social is super important for this group. The frequency and high touch may not be quite as much because they're busy. They're doing lots of things, but you need to be there to answer the why, the how. You need to support them when they need it, but assure them, this is a lot about self-assurance, that putting themselves first makes sense. So it's a different approach than the first person. Then you get on to number 3. It's progress and reinforcement. This one is all about being data and metrics driven. This kind of person, once you have a plan, you just keep needing to give them the quantitative feedback. This is the kind of person who streaks and other kinds of gamification really work for. They tend to be more competitive. So while a coach may initially give them that background, the coach backs way off. And this isn't the kind of person where spending the coach time and energy on would make sense. This is the kind of person that is very self-driven once they understand it. They're social, they're competitive, and they engage in their own style. If you push this kind of person to engage the way you want them to with a coach, usually doesn't go so well, and that's a person who can disappear. So we know that, and we back off. The fourth one is someone who is all about choices, context, and candor. They do want to understand their options, and they want us to tell them what to do. This is a person who needs to be given those options and understanding the pieces behind it. This is someone where content around why high blood pressure is bad for them, why a specific nutritional guide would work for them. The more information they know and the more they understand the situation they're in, the better they do. Once they've made up their mind, they become really independent, which is why the frequency of interactions is going to be medium to low over time. You start off with coaching, and live coaching, you may move to texting. Not sure about the social with this person, but definitely once they understand it, they get up and they go. And then the last person is the just tell me what you want me to do person. This person wants to be told every day. This person often will go to their doctor. The doctor will say, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and that person will do X, Y, and Z. No more, no less. They do exactly what's laid out for them. This kind of person really, can deal with coaching initially, often can go to kind of the robo-coach of the text. This is the high-frequency engagement because you need to be guiding them every step of the way. There won't be a lot of self-advocacy. They're just going to follow the rules. This is often what you will see the traditional wellness programs being very good for. This is the kind of person that you lay out a set curriculum, you provide them with those details, and they will follow that through. You can get great results with those kind of programs from this kind of person, but this makes up maybe 5 to 8% of the people who stick around those programs. These are the ones that really actually stay when you see drop-off in other traditional wellness programs. So as we think about this, these are the different models that you have out there. Is there anything you want to add to the models, Jeff?
No, I think the only thing I would add is that I love the way you described the who's left sticking around in terms of the disengagement, and I want to reinforce that because it's going to come up again in a few slides. So I want to make sure that that point was made for the group, that that's who's left. When you force option one, when we talked about earlier in terms of those standard types of programs, implicitly what happens is the 5s are able to stay with it. Everyone else ends up with a conflict in their normal day-to-day lives, and that's why you get that type of disengagement and why we harped on this in terms of modeling folks is more than just about the next or probability around if they do this number of things. It's more about understanding them as a user and then applying those models. So I just wanted to make sure I reiterated that, Cheryl. We'll go to the next one. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you. We've talked a lot about kind of now the dynamic models and the initial segmentation. We've learned that based on their activity, based on what we know about their personal profile and history, et cetera. But we've talked about the how we segment them and what that means. We haven't really looked at what we actually do with those nudges. We've talked about the activity. We've talked about how much interaction we might have, the type of interaction. But when you talk about systematic nudges, you're really talking about some of those coach activities, self-direction, automation, peer groups. Let's look at what some of those are in a little bit more detail. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk about the systematic nudges. So when we talk about that, again, we talk about small, easy things that they can do with the frequency that makes sense for them. So when we talk about small things, we talk about something like just take a picture of your food. We're not looking for people to spend lots of time. We usually talk about 15 minutes a day through all of these for them to interact with us, but that gets them thinking about and starting to change those behaviors slowly. So we ping the right people with the right behaviors, but they're all small nudges. Exercising for 30 seconds. If you say to exercise to one of those people we just talked about that's prioritizing their family above them, and you say you need to go out for a 30-minute walk, they're going to say, there's no way I can do that, and often just drop out. So what we do is we start knowing what they like. We start with 30 seconds, maybe then go to a minute, go to 3 minutes. We move them through the program in small, what feels like easy-to-consume steps, which keep them moving forward, feeling that sense of success, and being able to accomplish a lot more. It's amazing what you can accomplish with a small nudge. Looking at, completing an activity in less than 2 minutes. An activity might be something like text your coach what your biggest challenge is for the coming week. It may be something as small as tell us one benefit of staying on this program. Based on who you are, and what we know about your segment, different types of activities will come to you. Same thing if you wear your Fitbit to understand your sleep or you step on the scale. Those are also pieces of information. If we can get them to do that every day, it's one more interaction with the program. Again, the philosophy really is it's easy and simple. We work within the constraints of someone's day-to-day life and prioritize based on what we know about them. We are not asking them to change their lives wholesale, lock, stock, and barrel to the way we want them to behave. We realize their lives are already busy and full, so we want to insert small, easy nudges that we believe are the right ones for them into their lives so that the change feels organic, and that makes it far more sustainable.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cheryl. So I think what I'd like to do now, I'm just doing a time check, it's about 10:30, 12:30, so we're moving forward. What I want to do now is I want to go back to what I said earlier, right? And it was nudges drive engagement, engagement drives outcomes, and outcomes drive ROI. So what Cheryl and I have been talking to you about is how we determine the right nudge to give to the right person at the right time. But using the system I described before, the question obviously should be, well, does it drive engagement? And what we're going to start with now is a way to try to talk to you about our answer being yes. So let me just orient you to the slide real quick. This is a graph of monthly active user rates across our Restore program. Again, that's just with the example we're using for today, versus call them more traditional wellness programs. And again, I do want to reiterate, we've had over 750,000 users hosted on our platform across several different kinds of programs, and these are the kinds of disengagement curves that we've seen as well. And I'm sure those of you on the call have seen this. High excitement early on, folks are sticking around, they seem to be enjoying it, but by the time you're towards the end, you're talking about potentially mid to high single-digit engagement rates, maybe 10% by the end of the program. And the question is why? If you think about what we're doing in terms of the Zillion Cube and the determination of a personalized nudge that is easy and simple and works within their day-to-day life, you see a very different yield curve in red. That yield curve in red is the Restore program over a 12-month period, and you can see by the end of the program, north of 75% of users are still using it on a daily basis. On a monthly basis, I apologize. Now the question is, why is that happening, right? So really, let's just talk about behavior modification. I said things that violate behavior modification principles. So what do we think we're doing here? And we've hit on a lot of these earlier, but I really just want to start to bring it back. The first is that real relationship. The fact that those segments that Cheryl alluded to that require that relationship and that support and accountability are getting what they need, while those segments who don't necessarily need that and need more of the metrics and the quantitative feedback loops to keep themselves motivated, they're getting that. So you're getting that real relationship when and if you need it, or you're getting personalized and relevant content based upon the type of consumer that you are. All of that is incredibly important to keep folks engaged. But you can't forget the last part that Cheryl alluded to. If it's too complex, too difficult, or too intrusive to fit into the day-to-day life, people will disengage. It's that simple. As a result, we have to keep it easy and simple, and that's what we do. Now, the combination of these three things lead to that fourth bullet, and that fourth bullet really is persistent activation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, but what I want to again reiterate is this is an example, we believe, of engagement, nudges driving engagement, and the next slide is going to continue to harp on that. This particular graph starts to dig in a little bit on persistent activation. The bar charts that you see here, these are daily active user rates for the Restore program you see highlighted in the middle, just relative to some social media platforms. And you can see the legend, yellow is daily active user rate, orange is weekly, and red is less often. And when I talk to you about persistent activation in order to modify behavior, this is the culmination of the real relationship, the personalized and relevant experience and content, and easy and simple tasks coming together, resulting in high, very high daily interaction. This is incredibly important for us. Because we're not asking them to do really large tasks, we do want to see the corollary to that being a high volume of interaction with us. And so seeing this type of daily active user rate is exactly what we want to see. The actual graph is 56%. And then what you also think, we track another measure, it's called per member per day actions. We usually see around 3.5 actions per day, 3.5 actions per day across the meaningful engagement criteria that we have. And as a result, we do start to look a lot more like a social media platform that is fundamentally facilitating behavior modification. Now, this was the second part of the equation, right? Nudges driving engagement. So the next thing we should be talking about is, does engagement drive outcomes? And what I'd like to show you today is that we do believe these engagement levels that we're getting across our program are driving the outcomes that you would want to see across your population. What we have listed here are some of the elements associated with metabolic syndrome, the average starting points and ending points and average movement. And what I do want you to see is there's obviously other variables here. It has to do with the content in the Restore program. But strictly from an engagement perspective, think about that linear equation. If you can nudge them along, you can get them engaged. And if you can generate longitudinal engagement, you can generate longitudinal outcomes. And that's fundamentally what you're seeing here across the host of metabolic syndrome factors, which we, from our understanding, tends to be significant cost drivers in a lot of the populations that we work with. So we know we're having a significant impact. And again, the last part of the equation, because it's already 12:34, is that if you're generating these outcomes, you should be generating ROI. And what we can tell you is our ROI figures are coming in at approximately 2 to 3x your first year investment, and it's something that we're very proud of, and we do believe is inextricably tied to these outcomes that you see on the slide here, which is fundamentally tied to our ability to keep people engaged over time because of our different approach. So Charlotte, that's all I have, and I think we're at the conclusion.
Yeah, just to wrap things up. So, we started by asking telling you how employers are using condition management programs to reduce healthcare costs. We used our Restore program to start to answer that question of why we believe this is something different. This isn't the same as those two models that we showed you earlier, that we're taking what I would like to think is the best of both and putting them together to create a solution for you that helps you contain those costs while engaging your employees. So when you look at Zillion, we've delivered wellness programs to over 750,000 users. We've been doing it since 2015. But, so we've seen these same industry issues that you're experiencing. The reason we talked about them in the beginning is because we felt them firsthand. So when we set out to change the paradigm, we really wanted to be able to scale that one-to-one relationship that we believe is so valuable in getting results. And the way we do it is through the Zillion Cube. This results in that personalized program and nudges for every user. Our goal is to eventually get those, and it's just like cubelets, but those little segments down to as small as we can, because that makes the program feel more personalized. It doesn't feel creepy. It doesn't feel like someone's watching me. It just feels like it's the next right nudge at the next right time. This results in those engagement profiles that you saw. This results in people really taking to and following through on the program and using those small nudges to have real success. When we talk about Zillion driving nudges, nudges are what we believe drive that engagement. Engagement drives those outcomes, and outcomes will drive your ROI. What I'd like to do now is open it up and see if we have any questions.
At this time, if you would like to ask a phone question, please press the star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. You may withdraw your question at any time by pressing the pound key. Again, it is star, then 1 to ask a phone question, and we will pause to allow questions to queue.
And that's perfect. And in the interim, I do have a couple of questions coming in here as well. The first one has to do with the reference to ROI. So, I know that was quick. So on the outcomes, Pat, when I said our ROI we're seeing right now is 2 to 3x, just a little bit of backdrop on that, and again, we're happy to follow up. First thing we did was we actually did a business case validation with one of our larger clients and presented with them actually at the World Healthcare Congress, I think it was May or June of last year. That business case validation resulted in an assessment of an approximately 2x ROI on the first-year investment made by that particular client. And again, we have all the details associated with that. There's 2 other pieces to the ROI analysis. One is we looked at there's a paper published in 2009 that looked at costs associated with metabolic syndrome, and again, that's the Restore program. And we've also looked at the prospective savings resulting from the outcomes that I talked about. The combination really of all 3 of those together result in savings that we believe is on the order from approximately $1,500 to $2,700 per participant per year, not per employee, per participant in our programs per year, which then results in those ROIs. And just, do we have any questions coming in? Because I do have another one here on the chat.
There are no phone questions at this time, but as a reminder, it's star, then 1.
Perfect. No problem. The second question here, what is the engagement count? Oh, okay. So when I talked about engagement earlier and we talked about the monthly active user rates or daily active user rates, the question is, how do you define engagement? Great question, because we, across the folks that we work with, we hear this all the time. The way we define engagement, and I addressed it earlier, I think I moved a little too quick, has to do with what we call meaningful engagement. Meaningful engagement we define as interacting with either our coach, our devices, or our program in one of the ways that where we're providing data or input back and forth. So let me give you some examples. For the Restore program, if they do a meal log, if they complete a lesson, if they do an exercise, if they set up a call with their coach, if they text their coach, if they attend a live webinar, if they wear their Fitbit to track their sleep, or if they step on their scale. These are all things that we would define as meaningful engagement. And the reason we think that's important is because relative to some other terminology where you'll see things like logins or accessing the application, there are some literature out there that would call that vanity metrics. We do fundamentally believe that. So just to come full circle, the monthly active user rates that you saw and the daily active user rates that you saw, those are being calculated using meaningful engagement as the definition, meaning they had to do one of those items that I articulated across those 3 lanes. So I hope that answered the question. So let me pause there, sir. Any phone questions? Because it looks like we have one more as well on the chat.
There are no phone questions at this time.
Perfect. Cheryl, this one's come in your direction. And actually I have a slide here. It says, that's great. What does it look like? Okay. Oh, okay. So the cube, what does it look like on the side? Got it. I think I understand. If that's wrong, please let me know. So Cheryl, I'm just going to jump to one of the backup slides real quick. So what does it look like?
So if we think about it, we've talked a little bit about the member experience. It's primarily mobile, and they receive information right in their phone about lessons and activities. But there's another side to this, which is the coach view, and the coach also gets information out of the cube, driven by the cube, and it gives them a couple of different pieces of information that allows them to know what's the right member to reach out to at the right time. I think I'm going in the direction of the question, Joe. Correct me if I'm not. But we have things on the coach dashboard, our coach interface, that allows coaches to see at a glance what we would call the success index. The success index is where we think that member is at any particular point in time, how they're doing across all the different pieces of the program. And so they can narrow in on someone who's got a lower success index, look at their records and be able to see what they're able to do for that person. A coach has the ability to configure content, activities, exercises to meet that person's needs. They can text them, they can email them. There's several different ways to communicate and do phone calls. So driven off of the success index, that's one way a coach knows. The other way a coach knows is the cube actually can create alerts for the coach to know who to reach out to and when to reach out to them. So a coach would, again, look at their dashboard. Oh, thank you for having this slide too. The coach can look out at their dashboard, see what the alert is, and then trigger the appropriate response to the member. It lets the coach have a wide range of members on their dashboard, but know who are the people that need that intervention when they need that intervention.
Perfect. Thank you, Cheryl. And just if that didn't answer the question, please let me know. And that's all I'm seeing right now, sir. If you don't have anything else on the phone queue, I think that would wrap up today's webinar.
At this time, there are no questions on the phone queue.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for everyone who joined us today. We hope this answered your questions and gave you some insight about how we believe that you are able to use condition management programs like ours, to help reduce your overall healthcare costs. We know there are many customers that are using it today, and we'd love to talk to you about an opportunity to help you as well. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for your participation. This does conclude today's program. You may disconnect at any time.